Gemma Bonner, professional football player who has had the opportunity to play for England on multiple occasions. By the age of just 8, Gemma had already joined her hometown club of Leeds United. Fast forward to 2008, Leeds were the runner-up in the FA Cup and in 2010, League Cup winners. Then came the opportunity for Gemma to move to Chelsea for 2 seasons. Her versatility with both feet and strong aerial ability were key to Chelsea calling in January 2011, then her featuring in 2012's FA Cup final. November 2012, she signed for Liverpool following her ex-Chelsea manager Matt Beard, where she captained the team to the FA's Women's Super League titles in 2013 and 14, becoming the only player to captain a side to 2 consecutive Women's Super League titles. An England international, Gemma made her official senior debut in September 2013, where she was a part of the England squad for the UEFA Euros, however didn't get to play in the final tournament. In 2018, Gemma moved to Man City, clocking 115 appearances in her 6 years with the team. In 2021, Gemma signed her 2-year deal to move across the pond and play for Racing Louisville FC, and the following season finally getting named as one of 4 captains. I was lucky enough to catch up with Gemma at the beginning of her 2022 season to hear more about the limitless mindset of this Yorkshire powerhouse. Gemma Bonner, hello and welcome to the Rebel Without a Limit podcast. Thank you so much for accepting my invitation. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you for inviting me on.
Of course. When I was collating my list of people that I want to try and drag onto this podcast, you were at the top. And then I bumped into you when you were back home. And I just thought, that's a sign. I have to reach out and invite you. So thank you. Great. Well, without further ado, let's get on with it. I want to hear so much about you. I only know bits and pieces. And obviously there's so much great coverage there of your journey so far in the media, on your website, on your socials. I'm going to try and dig a little bit deeper in relation to the theme of the podcast, it being all about a limitless mindset. So for you, when I look at your story and what you've achieved, not only as an athlete, but as a woman in the world that you are in, it's so inspirational. And I hope that when we share this podcast, it's going to inspire even more young women, as you probably have already, I'm sure, in their droves with the story and what you're going to be sharing today. Because I look at you and you're there in, thank you for joining me from Louisville in Kentucky. I love it. And you've just achieved, you picked up so many trophies, so many accolades along the way in your career. But we're going to go back to the beginning and just kind of clock the journey that you've had and the timeline, if that's okay with you, and tap into the building on the mindset of where you are actually today with that as well. So you, from what I read, so correct me if I'm wrong, you went into Leeds United at 8 years old, is that correct?
Yeah, so when I was younger, it was almost 2 separate clubs, if you like. Now it's just like your main focus is academy, centre of excellence. But at the time, you would usually play for a local team, and then you got the opportunity to trial for Leeds United and be at the centre of excellence. So yeah, I was 8 at the time when I was trialling. But at the time, it shows, I mean, how far the women's game has come. The youngest age group at the time was under 12s. So I was a little 8-year-old at Leeds United Centre of Excellence. And I actually used to play in goal. So you can imagine little old me stood in goal against the under 12. So that was probably my first almost experience of being with older people. I mean, I'm the youngest in my family. So I've got older brothers, older sister, so I've always been used to it. And I guess that made me mature quicker. But in terms of on a footballing level, ever since I was 8, I was playing with people older than me.
Wow. And so where did that hunger for football come from? Was it your siblings, or did it come from Your parents?
I can't say it was my siblings, to be honest, as much as they'll try and claim it. Yeah, I mean, I don't really come from a sporting family. And being the youngest, being a female, I mean, my sister was quite into athletics and running, but not any kind of team sport as such. And you know, my mum and dad always say, like, ever since you were younger, you were kicking a ball around. And I guess that probably started the love of the game. And when I was younger, there wasn't a career as such for women footballers. There wasn't as many opportunities as there is now. So I kind of played because it was something that I loved doing. And I was so lucky because my mum and dad would support me in that, and they would find me the opportunities. My dad would be taking me to training and everything that kind of I needed to be at, whether it was football training or additional gym work, which came later on. Like, my mum and dad fully supported me with that. So it kind of went hand in hand, and that they were supporting me. I was doing something that I loved, but I never really took a step back and was like, I'm not actually going to have a career in that, because I was probably too young at the time to even think about what I wanted to be.
Yeah, so that's the confidence there, and the ability was obviously there, the skill set was there, but can you think of where your mind was at that point? And were you just enjoying it? Were you not even thinking, I'm confident in this, I can do this, I can take this further? Was that even in your mindset?
It was when I was younger, for sure, especially in primary school, because my primary school was so good. It had a girls' football team, and we won everything. So in primary school, it was great. I loved every single minute of it. And then at the time, the rule has now changed now, but girls couldn't play with the boys anymore from age 11, which is obviously when you start high school. Now I think it's a little later. It might be 16 now, I might be wrong, it might be 14. So once I hit high school, my high school, I can remember going to look around it and being like, do you have a girls' football team? And they were like, no. And I remember like thinking, I don't know whether this is a school for me, but so that was probably my hardest period going through high school, because I actually tried to set a girls' football team up, but there wasn't enough girls that wanted to play. And also having kind of the staff that were willing to stay and do the extra stuff. So that was probably my hardest battle, if you like, in the mindset. And especially in school, like being the only girl that played, it was like, oh, you're a man, you're a boy, like girls don't play football. And the more I would get selected, then that was when I used to represent West Yorkshire for county. And that would require, I would have to leave school earlier to go to games. And as you can imagine, not everybody saw a female playing football as a career. So trying to leave school early was always a bit frowned upon, because it was like education should come first. And when I say leave school early, it was probably 30, 45 minutes. So I wasn't missing full days at the time. So that was probably my real first experience of being like, okay, no, I really want to do it. It's playing for West Yorkshire. And again, when I would get to football, everyone was almost in the same position, because we were almost fighting the same battles. Although some high schools did have girls' football teams. And then it wasn't until I was age 13, I got my first selection for England under 15s. And that's when the school got notified. So they actually got a letter, because sometimes the training camps would mean that they were during school time, depending, of course, all the different term times throughout the country. And I probably saw a little shift in the mindset of being people wanted to get on board, oh wow, it was almost like, oh, she must be good, we want to be a part of it, or we want to support it. So I probably, after experience both sides of it, I kind of probably got a bit of a why do you have to be like that now just because England are involved? So that probably put me into a bit of I'm very not a principled person, but I'm like, you didn't want to support me when I was in year 7, but all of a sudden now in year 10, nothing's changed. But you actually think from the outside, oh, I must have something. And you want to be associated as such with that. So I probably learned early on to be like, there's people that want to support me and want to help me, no matter what situation I'm in. But there's also going to be people that only jump on board when you're doing well. So that was probably my hardest time in terms of, or my first time, I guess, of really experienced people that are challenging what you want to do and why you want to do it. But like I said, like the support of my parents, they were there from day one. And there was nights that I would be out every night, training at different places, playing on a Saturday, Sunday. I think every day I was out playing football somewhere different. So I always had that support mechanism behind me, which let me be like, okay, well, they're supporting me. That's all I need.
Beautiful, beautiful. Yeah, it's the magpie story, really, isn't it? The shiny object, and now they're coming in, and look how, you know, the attention, and but it sounds like it was your strength. You know, it became your a huge strength of yours, that knowledge and the awareness, which is great. It didn't kind of stop you from the strive and from still tuning into that limitless mindset. So amazing. So yeah, so if we touch a bit more on the England representation, so by the time you made your debut as a senior in the squad, as a Lioness, you had so much experience playing for England in the, you moved into under 17s, didn't you, 19s, 20s, under 23. How did you find competing at that level? How did you find that you coped with it?
Almost like a natural progression in a sense, but partly because when I was 16, I went to the National Development Centre in Loughborough. So I actually moved out technically at 16, and went and lived with the girls at Loughborough, which was where we trained and we did education alongside that. So that was kind of the next step and next progression for me in terms of the college that I would have naturally gone to back at home. Again, it didn't have a good football program for me. But the opportunity to work with the national coaches daily, I guess moving away from home, it was a big decision quite early, but the foundation and the reason was for my football. So again, like I would be away Monday to Friday through the week, and I think the program, there was 20 players on it. And again, I was the youngest player. So it was 16, I was 16 at the time, and there would be senior players there too. So because I had the experience of playing with senior internationals when I was 16 and on a daily basis, and kind of seeing how they worked and lived their life effectively while we'd all study at the same time, because the game was very much, I wouldn't even say it part-time at that time. Like it was, but it was only a couple of nights a week training. So the game was so far away from what it is now. But naturally I got to see the dedication and what people kind of had to do, especially now. Like now I look at the younger players and I'm like, wow, you don't realize how easy it is for you, because you don't have to do a job, you don't have to like study, like everything is here for you. Whereas I'm grateful for the journey, I guess, that I've been on in terms of through college. Then I moved back home, went to university. I graduated from university in the July, and Liverpool turned fully professional in the January. So for me, that was like perfect timing, in essence, of kind of saved me having to get a job, because I was like, I know that was what I wanted to do, was play football at that point. But now obviously it's a much smoother transition. You've got 16-year-olds training with first teams, getting their education facilitated alongside it. And it's not just 20 people in the country, having to kind of work around that, do jobs. And there's actually naturally at 18, you can work and get a full-time playing contract. You get accommodation, like there wasn't that. So I'm grateful for that kind of life experience and learning how to get there, which has probably made me appreciate more now how the game is.
in terms of the comparison to the women's and the men's league and the cups and the everything else that's out there that you can compete in, you know, we are so far behind in sport and so many other levels, aren't we, women compared to men, as much as we like to think that we are further forward, and we are in many respects, but still so far to go. What a phenomenal opportunity to build your foundations, to have been part of that era and part of that time, because, you know, it was so long before the women's league and then what it's progressed into now, even just to go professional and to be paid and to be secured the minimum hour contract. I mean, what was there any point through the process and the history of that process that you were part of that you were doubting? Was there ever any doubt that you wouldn't be able to create this as a career for yourself because of the way that the system really was set up?
Probably not, if I'm being honest, because when I moved to Loughborough at 16, that was kind of the time that there was whispers about the Women's Super League coming in, and it was a part-time league, and then it had the visions to go full-time. And it was very much a case of, okay, let's see if it happens, because there was nothing ever like that before. So, but the big thing I can remember at the time was that it has to be sustainable, which is when all the licenses came in. So it was a well-structured, well-thought-out league, whereas at the time in America, the league had folded because it had just crashed. So because it wasn't sustainable. So I think the league deserved like a huge amount of credit for the way that they've built the league, and it's progressed year on year. They've added teams, and it's been based upon a strong foundation, and each club has to meet those criteria. So it's been very much a process. But having kind of seen that when I was 16, 17, it materialized effectively 5 years later or 6 years later. So it was very much a process, and I'm lucky that I was probably the first generation of players as such that kind of fell straight into that, from graduating and getting an education to going into full-time. So it allowed me to study, do my football around it, but it very much allowed me the process and the timing of it. But I also knew that England wasn't necessarily the only place to play football. As daunting as it was, there was, I guess, always America in terms of university options. But I think once the kind of plans for the Women's Super League started, that probably in my mind was like, yeah, this is me.
Great. Well, I can't wait to hear more about your Louisville story. Before we get there, though, I've got to touch on the cups and the wins and the accolades that you've picked up with. So you've been with, obviously you start with Leeds, you've been with Chelsea, Liverpool. Now that's where I'm coming from today. You are the only woman on the painting, and the 125-year anniversary painting. Is that correct?
Yeah.
You captained the team to win two consecutive titles, and the only player to have done that as well. I mean, I've got pimples just saying it. It's absolutely incredible. Like, looking back, do you still pinch yourself, or because so many amazing memories and historical points in the timeline as well?
Yeah, I guess probably because I'm still playing. You almost don't realize until like someone says it to you. But yeah, I mean, I'm extremely proud of like what I have achieved, but I also know that I want to achieve so much more still. And I would hope that I've still got a good few years left to kind of go on and achieve that. And I think once you experience it, you only want to go and get more. But yeah, I guess being exposed to a first team environment when I was at Leeds at 16. I've been, which makes me sound very old now, I've been in the first team environment this is probably my 15th season. So like when we've got such a young team at the moment, and when they're coming through, I'm like, I've nearly been in the first team environment nearly as old as you are now. Like, so I know it's been a long process, and I know that I've worked hard to get here. But I've also had different experiences. So when I was at Leeds, like I said before, the licensing came in for the Super League, and at the time Leeds United put the proposition for the league forward, but the funding was pulled out at the last minute after the deadline. So we had such a good team at Leeds United. There was so many of us which were youth internationals, and the potential of the team was so good. But if we wanted to play in the top league, then there was going to be no Leeds in the top league, so we all had to leave. And that was, I was still very young at the time. I was 18. And I was very unsure about because at that time I wasn't regular, being only 18. And I wasn't sure how am I going to get into the top league, because my hometown team that I've been at all my life is now all of a sudden not there, and I'm not necessarily in the shop window, like nobody's going to want me. So in the transition of the leagues, it went from a winter league to a summer league, and Leeds ended up dropping into the league below. So what I did was I stayed and played, because there was like a 6 or 7 month gap. So I actually stayed and continued with Leeds. And by the Christmas time, so it was probably August to December, and by the Christmas time I'd had a few clubs that were interested in me. So I remember having the decision to make, and I knew which one I wanted to do because I knew it was probably my best option, but I was probably too afraid to do it because it was Chelsea, and I was part-time. I was studying at university, and to train in one way, it was 215 miles. So I was like, it's not possible. Like, it's just not going to work. And my mum and dad were like, no, Chelsea's the best option for you. Like, we'll facilitate it. Like, my dad would drive me. We think that's what you should do. So I was like, well, you don't need to tell me twice, because I knew that was the option I wanted to do. So yeah, me and dad spent a lot of time in the car together, it's fair to say. But I would study, he would pick me up from university at 2 p.m. We would travel down to London. It would be 4.5 hours just for a 2-hour training session. And then we would get back at like 1 a.m. And then I'd go to, again, uni the next day. So I would do that 3, sometimes 4 times a week, depending on when our games were. Because obviously at the weekend we would play home games, which for me, it was an away game, every home game. So away games were actually, I couldn't have played for a team further away. So yeah, that was that experience quite early on. I did that for 2 years, and then that was when in my final year I was like, I need to be closer to home. The game was improving. I needed more contact time and more training time, because at the time the club would train twice a week, but they would only say like to come for 1 session and do my own training. But I wanted to be training with the team. I didn't want to just turn up at the weekend and play after only training once. So I felt like a responsibility, like I need to get better. There's only so much training you can do on your own. You need to be in that team environment and kind of learn in football. Like, we're not runners, we're football players. So that was when I made the decision to move closer to home, which was obviously Liverpool. And being a Liverpool fan, it was kind of, it was pretty crazy to see how it's grown now. Like, I actually look back at my signing picture for Liverpool. I never forget, it was like 10 p.m. on a Friday night. We just trained outside in the rain, and we just came inside to get under shelter from the rain, and I was just holding a shirt up. And then now I'm like, wow, they're all going to Anfield, having like the signing days, like at the changing room. I'm like, it's so good to see like how the times have changed. So that was kind of like, I guess because I was so young, I was exposed to a lot of different experiences.
And again, it just contributes to instilling that limitless mindset that it just seems to ooze out of you. So progression-wise with the Women's Super League and everything that's surrounding it now, I mean, in 2019 there was a huge investment from Barclays with the sponsorship, wasn't there? It was a 3-year contract, and then the announcement of the Hall of Fame. Like, it just keeps it's progressing in such a phenomenal way, isn't it? And it's beautiful to watch. You could look back in one aspect and say we wish it could have been sooner, but I just feel like it's unraveling in the most beautiful way. So for you watching it and having friends that are a part of it as well as still being involved in it, it must be quite a really special moment in time.
It is, and I think we're also grateful of the players that also like played before me, because I'm like, what they managed to achieve by working however many different jobs to actually train around. Like, I remember again when I was 16 at Leeds, our captain at the time, her job, she chose to be a postwoman just so that she could be flexible around playing games and training, because that was what she wanted to do. So she worked around that. She would be up at 6 a.m, like training, but also it was an active job that would help her with football. So I guess there's so many players that have kind of done all the hard work effectively before. But I also think the great thing is now that the players, especially kind of my age, we all realise and have gone through that phase that naturally, I mean, especially even the younger players now, naturally, everybody wants the game to grow. So I think everybody's willing to promote it, or, you know, they want to help the next young girl, because we were also in that position not too long ago. So I think right across the board, and I think women in general are huge advocates to grow women in sport, not just in football, but I think across the world of sport, and whether that be like actively or in the boardrooms or in the positions that you don't necessarily see. I think actively women are always there to support, because I guess it's almost sometimes a bit of the unknown for women to be in positions in the sporting world that's not necessarily comfortable for them.
For me, coming from my background, I've got motorsport background, and so it's only really the last, I'd say 2 or 3 years, you've really been seeing that shift within the female representation in the sport. And it's great to see, really fantastic. And like you say, across the board to see it now as well, and the awareness as well, which is really important. So before we quickly just then move on to Louisville, where you are now, I just want to touch on that day that you made the debut with the Lionesses, the first time you I know you had the wealth of experience in the build up to that, but tell me what it felt like to put that shirt on and seeing your debut. Tell me all about it. How did you feel?
Yeah, it was a bit probably emotional, actually. I remember being in the tunnel, kind of walking out, and we only found out this team, like, I think it was the day before. And I knew obviously it was going to be my debut. And again, it was probably the furthest game that we could have had. I was lucky that it was in England, but it was in Portsmouth. And from Leeds to Portsmouth, it's not the closest. But I knew I had my dad in the crowd. I remember thinking at the time, the squad at that time, it never really changed. It was almost like once you got into the team, you knew that, wow, you've achieved something, because, I mean, Hope Powell was the manager just before then. And the team and the squads were pretty consistent. So to actually break into that at any point, you had to work hard for it. And again, going through that process, I'd been in and around the squad for 2 years prior to that, and it took 2 years to actually make my debut. I guess it was a proud moment and definitely an emotional one. And we won too, so that always helps.
Right, and 11 caps on, fantastic. So you're in Louisville now in Kentucky. So you went from Man City and signed for Louisville, so it's Racing Louisville FC now, isn't it? They must absolutely love you over there. How are you getting on?
Oh, I'm absolutely loving it. It's actually funny enough, it's a year now since I moved over, which has absolutely flown by. Or a year coming up in June, but it's been probably, I didn't really know what to expect. It was completely unknown coming out, the move, how it kind of materialized in the first place. I never expected it. I just bought a house at home, and then all of a sudden I'm moving to America. And yeah, like I said, I didn't know anyone, didn't really know what I was kind of going in for. But what I did see from the club was a clear vision and how they want to progress the women's team, how they support the women's team, and the vision to be a winning team. And that was probably a huge pull for me. And from having those conversations, it made me hungry to want to go and challenge myself, because it probably made me realize at the time that I was actually quite comfortable in England. I'd won everything domestically in the league. I was kind of in a bit of a routine. I played in the league since it started. And for me, I wasn't going to go anywhere else in England just for the sake of moving, because I was at one of the best teams. Like, I had no real reason to move. So the opportunity to play in another top league, which was going to be a challenge for me, moving across, leaving my boyfriend, my family, leaving everything effectively and just going. It was a decision that I had to make because I was going to live it. But it also excited me because it was something new. It was a challenge that it wasn't going to be easy, but it was also going to push me, both in life and on the football field, because it's a completely different league from England. Like, the style of football is so different, and it was something that I hadn't necessarily been exposed to or experienced in England. And yeah, I guess moving away from home, like, it almost made me appreciate home more. I'm very much a family person, so that was my hardest decision, having to leave them. But when I come home for Christmas, and, you know, like, when I'm here, I'll speak to my mum and dad every day. So it's very much kind of, I'm here to do my job, but if I'm here, I need to make it worthwhile while I'm here, because I'm leaving so much behind.
Absolutely. Incredible. So your dad has just been there recently as well. So you got there mid-season, didn't you, last year? And you guys took the title. So recently Women's Cup title was yours, and now you're captaining the squad. So you're captain this season, and your dad was there from the start of the season, and he happened to be there when you scored and when you won at home at Kansas City. How amazing. What a great
it was
to have together.
It was pretty special. Like, my dad has been my number one supporter. He's been at every single game. Like I said, we spent a lot of time traveling to training. So when I moved over here, he was trying to book flights to be here for my first game last year. But obviously, I wasn't really aware of the travel situations. Obviously, COVID was pretty big, but there was no one from the UK able to enter. So I was able to get in on a sport exemption. So obviously, my dad couldn't come and visit. And the only time that the restrictions were lifted was actually the week that I got back to England in November. So it was kind of like, well, I'm home now. Like, so as soon as the fixtures came out for this, we're about to finish the pre-season Challenge Cup. But as soon as these came out, then he was like, I'm booking to come out for the first. We had 2 home games to start with, and then it was Chicago away. And I mean, Louisville's not the easiest place to get to from England. It's a very small airport. So he decided to fly through Chicago, and then he would get that game and then fly back. And as he sent me the dates, I was like, Dad, we played like 2 days after you leave in Kansas. You may as well come to Kansas anyway. So he's like, okay then. Like, he twisted my arm. I'm like, Mom, you need to let Dad come longer. She's like, fine. So yeah, he came, stayed with me in Louisville, and then we went to Chicago, and then on to Kansas. And obviously he said to me just before, he was like, right, I've seen you lose a game, I've seen you draw a game, now I need to see you win and score. And obviously that happened in his last game. And I was like so happy, but I was like, I have no idea where he was in the stadium. I was like looking for him the whole pre-game. I was like, I have no idea where he is. And my dad's so quiet, like he likes to keep himself to himself. So he doesn't like being center of attention or anything like that. So I'm like, he doesn't wear any like anything that's going to make him stand out. I'm like, I have no idea where he is. Anyway, then I scored, and I'm like looking around. I'm like, wherever you are, I'm so happy. So yeah, it was pretty emotional, but I was just so happy that he could be here. And hopefully he's planning. We play in New York in May, so hopefully that's such an easier flight for him. It's just a direct, the closest home game, if you like, for him. So I'm hoping we can see each other again then.
Fantastic, absolutely brilliant. They must be so proud of you. They really must, and the dedication and the commitment that you've given throughout your life, your career, and they must be super, super proud. So just to round this off, I know you're busy, you're a wanted lady, so just a couple of quick questions to round it off. Coming back to the limitless mindset theme of the podcast, then what does limitless mindset mean to you?
For me, it's always you want to strive to be better. I think you can always be content, but you can never be satisfied if you want to keep striving to be better. And I always say, like, to the young players, like, never be afraid to make mistakes, but always want to go and improve on them and learn and make sure you don't make the same mistakes twice, because no matter what you do, if you come out, you train hard, you work hard, you'll always be better than you were yesterday. And as long as you kind of keep that open mindset, and the thing for me is that you try and embrace the challenge and make the most of it, because a lot of things that come at you, you can't always control, but you can control what you do and how you deal with them. And that's how you hold yourself, how you train, how you do your jobs, how you live your life, what you eat, what you drink, like your timekeeping, all those kind of little things almost reflect on you and how you are as a person.
Superb. And finally, 3 words that resonate with you in relation to a limitless mindset, how you would describe it in 3 words.
I'd say you have to be driven, opportunistic, and committed.
Awesome. Love it. Gemma Bonner, thank you so much. Thank you for all you've done for the sport, your commitment, your inspirational story. Thank you for your time, more importantly. Keep doing what you're doing. I'll be watching from the sidelines and cheering you on, and look forward to sharing this podcast. So thank you, Gemma, and I'll speak to you very soon.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Of course. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click on the bell for notifications, and share with anyone you think that might enjoy it too.